Imagine buying your dream home, only to discover, decades later, that beneath the floorboards and hidden within the crawl space lies a horrific secret. A 55-gallon drum, sealed tight, holding not just evidence of a crime, but the remains of a young woman who vanished without a trace. This is the story of Reyna Marroquin, a case that haunted detectives for 30 years before the truth finally came spilling out. Reyna Angelica Marroquin was born in El Salvador, full of hope and ambition. In the late 1960s, she left her home country and immigrated to the United States. Like so many who arrived in New York, she carried the dream of starting anew, building a life for herself, far from the hardships of her past. She was just 27 years old, young, vibrant, and described by friends as kind-hearted. Reyna had an energy that drew people in. She found work at a plastic flower factory in New Jersey, where her creativity and determination quickly made her stand out. Colleagues recalled her as hardworking but also somewhat shy, still learning to navigate the culture of her adopted country. But Reyna's personal life was complicated. At some point during her work at the factory, she became romantically involved with one of the company's married co-owners, Howard Elkins. The relationship was kept secret, but those close to Reyna would later say she was in love with him, and eventually, she became pregnant. For Reyna, this was life-changing. For Elkins, it was dangerous. He had a wife, a family, and a respected reputation in his Long Island community. A child with Reyna would expose everything. And Reyna, perhaps out of desperation, confided to her friends that if Elkins refused to acknowledge the child, she might tell his wife. Then, in 1969, Reyna vanished. She disappeared so suddenly that even those who knew her best assumed she might have gone back to El Salvador, or perhaps moved elsewhere in the US. The truth was far darker, and it would take 3 decades for anyone to find out. Fast forward to September 1999. A family living in Westbury, Long Island, was renovating their basement. Like many basements in older homes, it was cluttered with decades of forgotten junk. In a dimly lit crawl space, they stumbled upon a large, heavy, 55-gallon drum tucked into a corner. It was unusual, and its weight made it almost impossible to move. The family's curiosity soon turned into unease. The drum had clearly been there for decades, sealed tightly, with dust and cobwebs masking its presence. After struggling to open it, they finally managed to crack the lid. What they found was a nightmare. Inside the barrel were hardened plastic pellets, chemicals, decayed material, and buried beneath it all human remains. The body was that of a young woman, still partially preserved by the chemicals inside. Alongside her were personal belongings, clothing, jewelry, and most significantly, an address book. The family immediately contacted authorities, and detectives arrived to confront what would become one of the most chilling cold case discoveries in New York history. The barrel was sent for forensic analysis. The first question: who was the victim? Despite the decades that had passed, the address book provided a breakthrough. Though water-damaged, many numbers and names could still be read. One name leapt out to investigators: Howard Elkins. Detectives quickly learned that Elkins had once lived in the very house where the barrel was discovered. Even more damning, he co-owned the factory where Reyna had worked back in the 1960s. This wasn't a coincidence, it was a direct link. Forensic experts worked to identify the remains, and soon, through DNA testing, they confirmed what investigators suspected. The body was that of Reyna Marroquin. But the evidence didn't stop there. The barrel itself was manufactured in the late 1960s. Inside were pellets identical to those used at Elkins's flower factory. The container wasn't just a hiding place. It was a fingerprint of his business, tying him unmistakably to the crime. The motive became clear. Reyna was pregnant with Elkins's child, and he feared the consequences of exposure. By luring her into his home under the guise of conversation, he murdered her and sealed her body inside the barrel, believing no one would ever find her. Armed with this information, detectives tracked down Howard Elkins in Florida. By now, he was in his 70s, retired and living comfortably. When confronted with the evidence, Elkins grew nervous. He denied knowing anything about Reyna's disappearance but couldn't explain why her body would be found in his former home, inside a barrel filled with materials from his factory. Investigators informed him that they intended to collect DNA samples to test against the unborn child found with Reyna's remains. This was the breaking point. Elkins realized that science would confirm what he had kept hidden for 30 years, that he had fathered Reyna's child, and likely killed her to protect his reputation and family. The next day, Elkins was found dead in his car. He had taken his own life with a shotgun. He left no note, no confession, only silence. For detectives, it was a bittersweet resolution. They had uncovered the truth of what happened to Reyna Marroquin, but the man responsible had escaped justice through suicide. Still, forensic testing later confirmed what investigators already knew. The unborn child Reyna carried belonged to Howard Elkins. For Reyna's family in El Salvador, the news was devastating. They had spent 3 decades wondering what became of her, clinging to faint hope that she was still alive somewhere. Instead, they learned she had been murdered, her body hidden in a basement thousands of miles away. Her remains were finally returned home, giving her family the closure they had been denied for so long. The case left behind haunting questions. How many homeowners had unknowingly lived above Reyna's body, never realizing the horror concealed in their crawl space? How many times did people walk past that barrel without ever imagining what lay inside? The story of Reyna Marroquin is more than just another cold case solved. It's a chilling reminder of how fragile trust can be, how a man respected by his community could harbor such darkness, and how secrets buried in the past have a way of rising to the surface, no matter how deeply they're hidden. Today, Reyna is remembered not just as a victim, but as a young woman whose life was stolen in a moment of selfishness and fear. Though Elkins took the coward's way out, the truth finally came to light. And with that truth, Reyna's story, silent for 30 years, was finally given a voice.